welcome back to part 2 of our Asteroids game tutorial. In the last tutorial we got our spaceship out here into the scene and we got him moving around and screen wrapping. So in this next one we're going to start by adding in the ability for our spaceship to shoot some sort of a projectile. So we're going to need to grab a bullet of some sort for him to shoot, and then we'll add some code and get us instantiating some bullets in and all that good stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our hierarchy. We're going to create a 2D object and we're just going to create a sprite. Now the sprite has a sprite render on it and it doesn't have a sprite assigned. So what we're going to do here is click the little circle next to sprite, and that'll give me all the sprites that are currently loaded into my project. So these of course are all the asteroids that I've already dumped in, but if we scroll way down past all the asteroids, we're going to get into some of the default system sprites inside of Unity, and they're way down at the bottom just the way this is numbered. So okay, we've got kind of this background square one. We have this knob though that is a circle, so I'm just going to select knob, and you'll notice that I get a white little circle here on my scene. There it is. And actually let's go ahead and drag that over next to our spaceship just to see how big it is in relationship to our spaceship. And it might be a little bit small. We'll have to kind of play with it and see. A matter of fact, we can look to see what it looks like at full screen. If I click in my game window and I hold down shift and push my spacebar, I'll get to full screen. So this is actually what my game is going to look like when I go to play it in full screen mode. So maybe that's not too small. That might be okay. Shift spacebar again will bring me back to seeing all my windows. It should be in a good spot here. And so let's rename this, not as new sprite, but let's rename this bullet. So this is my bullet or my laser beam or my rocket or whatever, and we could swap this sprite out with a different graphic later on if we want to. For now we're going to do this. Now if we want a different color, all we really have to do is go over here to the color block on the sprite render, and since the sprite is white we can tint it to any color we want. So if you want, you know, maybe some sort of a kind of an electric blue kind of a sprite or something, you can do that. If you want a yellow or a red, we can get into the reds here, make a red one. You can make this whatever color you want. I think I might leave it kind of a bright cyan blue kind of a color, like so. Now we're going to need to be able to push our bullets across the screen, and we're also going to need to be able to collide with things. So our bullet is going to need a couple of components. All right, we're going to move the bullet with the physics system. So let's add a rigid body 2D to the bullet. Again, we're going to take gravity off to 0 so that there's no gravity there. And that should be all we need to do for now, is put that on there like so. And then we're also going to want to add a physics 2D circle collider 2D. So we want a collider of some sort because eventually we need to know if we've hit something else. And since this is a circle, I'm just going to add a circle collider to it. And if you zoom in your scene view, you'll notice that the circle collider got drawn around the outside edge of our little bullet here. And you might want to just drag the radius down just a little bit. Whoops. It got a little too small there, maybe a 0.09, just so that it's a little more closely matched with the edge. Okay, and then we want this bullet not to act, or this collider not to act as a physical barrier that wouldn't allow it to pass through things. We actually want it to act as a trigger, because when it overlaps something, we don't want it to push it or bounce off of it. We want it just to say, hey, I hit something, so that we can then take action. So I'm going to check this one right here that says is trigger. That'll make it a trigger collider, which will allow us to trigger an event later on. Okay, so we've got our bullet, we've got a rigid body, we've got a circle collider 2D on there. Now the bullet's going to need to be able to be pushed. All right, so we will be instantiating or cloning these bullets in from our spaceship and giving them a push and just letting them go on their merry little way here. So let's see if we can do this without adding any kind of a script to our bullet for now. So let's go back to our spaceship. Let's go back to the spaceship script. And let's first of all set up so we can instantiate these bullets. So I'm going to need a variable. I'm going to need a public, and we can make these whatever we want here. I'm just going to probably make this a public game object so I can store the whole entire game object of the bullet, and we'll call this our bullet. We'll link that in out in the inspector. Okay. We're also going to need a fire button in our inputs that's going to be for firing these bullets. So we've got a spot to hold the bullet here. Let's save that. We'll go out into Unity, and we should see that new, here it is, new variable pop up in our inspector. We're going to want to eventually load our bullet into there. We need to make the bullet a prefab first though, so we could go ahead and do that now. What you want to do is, to make a prefab, just grab the object from your hierarchy. So I'm going to grab the bullet, and I'm going to drag and drop it into my asset panel. When I do that, it stores a copy of the bullet in my project panel, and you notice the bullet turned blue up here. That tells me that this is now a prefab. It is a copy of a master. So the master is down here, and this out here is an instance or a copy of it. So now I've got a master copy of the bullet. This is the one I need to tell the script to refer to when it wants to make more of them, because if it tries to make copies of this one and this one's been destroyed, we're going to have errors. It's not going to have anything to make a copy of. So we always make them into a prefab. So if I go back to my spaceship now, I can load my prefab bullet right here into my bullet game object slot. So I'm going to grab the bullet from the project panel, and I'm going to drop it over here. Now the bullet prefab, the one on my project panel, is linked in to the script for my spaceship. So it knows I'm talking about this when I refer to bullet. Okay. The other thing we need to do is go into our input manager and set up a fire input. So I'm going to go to Edit, Project Settings, Input, and we have a couple of fires, but they're set to like left controls and mouse buttons and things like that. Let's go ahead and just take this fire one and change the button that we're going to be looking for. So the button that I'm going to choose here is the space bar. So I can just type in space just like this. If you want to be able to play this game with the mouse, you can leave the mouse 0 button in here. That should be the left mouse button. I'm just going to take that out for now. So we're just looking at the space bar as our button for fire, and that's called Fire 1. Alright, and we don't have to change anything else. We just make sure we know what the name is and what the button is that we're trying to work with, space bar. Okay, so now we're ready to go back into our script here and add some commands that will allow us to make copies of the bullet object when we push the space bar. Now again, anytime we're doing keyboard input, we're going to do that in the update function. So I'm going to add this code up here in my spot where I'm checking for input from the keyboard. And if we get a input from our fire button, then we want to fire a bullet. So we're going to check for input from the fire key and make bullets in this section right here. So we're going to ask a question here, a conditional statement. We're going to say if input dot. Now this time we're not getting an axis. We're not working with like a directional type of thing. We just want one time this button has been clicked. So what we're going to use is we're going to use get button down. And get button down needs us to tell it which button we're listening for. That was that Fire 1 input. You got to spell it exactly the way it was in the input manager. So get button down will return us a true during the frame the user first pressed down the button. So it's like single fire mode, right? One button press will equal one bullet in this kind of a mode here. So we're saying input manager look for a button being pressed down. The button we're looking for is fire 1. Okay, so if we get this coming back as a true, that means we just push the space bar and we want a bullet to be made. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to make a copy or a clone of our bullet prefab, and then we're going to need to push that bullet in the direction that we're currently facing. So we're going to first of all have to instantiate. So instantiate's a command we use to make a clone of something, and the first thing we need to give instantiate is the object that we want to make a clone of. So that's going to be our bullet. And then what we're going to need to do is tell it where to put this bullet, okay? Where to position it. Right now we'll go ahead and position it right exactly where our spaceship is. So we'll say transform.position. And then we also need to tell it how to rotate it. And we'll rotate it the same way as our player is facing our spaceship, so that would be transform.rotation. Alright, so that will cause a bullet to be dropped onto the screen. So we can actually test this out here. Let's save it, go out into Unity. Let's check on our spaceship. We do have the bullet here. We can get rid of this bullet in the scene because we don't need it. We're going to make more. And if I was to hit play now and hit the space bar, you'll notice that a bullet clone showed up right here in the hierarchy, and if you look, there's a bullet that got dropped right in the center where my spaceship currently is. Okay, and if I move my spaceship off of that, it'll sit there. Every time I hit spacebar now, I'm dropping a bullet right where I was. Okay, right, one bullet for every time I press the button. So that's got it popping in. Now what we really want it to do once it pops in is we want it to go zooming off in the direction that we're currently facing. Alright, so we need to go back into our script here, and not only do we want to make this, but we want to give it a shove. So to do that, I need to actually store this bullet that I just made into a variable. Okay, so I'm going to have to make let's make a game object variable called new bullet, and let's set that equal to this instantiate. Oops, I overwrote my I. Alright, so we're going to say game object new bullet. We'll set it equal to this one that we just made. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the new bullet. We're going to find its rigid body, and we're going to give its rigid body a push. So we're going to then say new bullet dot get component. So what we want to do is get a component, a piece of the new bullet. The component that I want, and I'm going to put in the angle brackets here, it's going to be its rigid body 2D. Alright, so that's how you write that. That will get me access to its rigid body, and then I'm going to add a relative force. And since we rotated this bullet the same way as we rotated our ship, we should be able to just add a relative force on the y-axis again, just like we are adding thrust to our ship. So we're going to add relative force. We have to give it a vector 2, so we'll give it a vector 2 dot up. And we're going to take that times some sort of a bullet force. So let's call this bullet force. It's going to be a variable we're going to make up at the top that's going to give us how much we're pushing the bullet, so that's basically how fast it's going to move. Alright, so we need to make this bullet force variable. That's why it's looking at me all pink here. So let's go up to the top here and make a public float. We'll call this bullet force like that. Okay, so that's ready to go. And we just have to assign this out in the inspector, and that will tell us how hard to push this bullet. So let's save that. Let's go out and make sure we don't have any errors here. It looks good. Alright, so let's go to our spaceship. You'll notice now we have a bullet force variable here. So let's do something like a 200. We're probably going to have to push it pretty hard to get it moving like we want it to. It just depends on how fast you want to push your bullet on the screen. And now when we play and we push the spacebar, not only will we make one of those bullets, but we should see that bullet go zooming off in the direction we're facing. So let's just test it out, make sure we've thought it through correctly. So I hit spacebar and there goes a bullet. If I turn my ship, you notice whichever way I'm turning, that's the way I'm pushing the bullet. So every time I press, I get a bullet. And they're moving in a straight line. Okay, now if you want your bullets to move faster, then you just up the bullet force. Alright, now the one thing you will notice that we're having now is I've shot a bunch of bullets off, and those bullets are all still here in my game. They're moving off camera now way far away. We can't even really see him anymore. If I select one and I zoom way out, he's way out here somewhere, way far away. And he'll keep going forever and ever and ever until we end the game. So this could become a problem of overhead after a while for our memory and our processor. So let's set up a little time-based destruct bomb here on these bullets where they'll just remove themselves after a while. We can do that up here after we instantiate them and give them a push. We can also give them basically a self-destruct timer. So again, we'll just say we'll use the destroy command. This will destroy an object, and I can tell it which object, what's going to be the new bullet, the one that I just made. And then if I put a comma here, it gives me a float called t, and t is the amount of time to delay before destroying. So this would be in seconds. So we could give it something like maybe a 3.0, F for float, and then it will wait 3 seconds and then destroy itself. And you can kind of play with this to see what's the longest time it takes actually for a bullet to get off the edge of the screen, depending on how fast your bullet's going. If it doesn't hit anything by the time it goes off screen, then we just want to get rid of it. So I'm going to actually make this more like a 2 second. And let's see what happens now. So let's save it. Let's go back out into Unity. And then we will hit play. And let's just shoot a bullet and watch and see if it goes away. So 1,000, 2, 1,000. Okay, so it looks like it blinked out before it got to the edge of the screen. See that? So 2 seconds is too short for this bullet speed. Now if I want my bullet to move faster, maybe that would be okay. That's where we just kind of play with that. And as a matter of fact, we could make that a public variable and expose it in the inspector so that we could actually tweak that as we play tested the game. For now, I'm just going to increase it to a 3, and we'll see if that's good enough for now. So we'll try it one more time here. Alright. Yeah, there it got all the way off the edge of the screen before it so some of them are still winking out a little bit before the edge, so again we might have to play with that. Maybe we'll just put it up to a 5 for now and we'll let it get off the screen a ways, but eventually they'll go away and kind of clean themselves up. Okay, so now we're able to fire bullets and give them a push, and they're destroying themselves when they get outside of the edge of our screen. Okay, so now that we've got bullets here, we actually have to have something for that bullet to shoot. We want it to hit something. So what we're going to work on next is adding in our asteroids, and we'll do that in the next video. Try to keep these somewhat short. So in the next video we'll add in our asteroids and get them reacting to our bullets. Thanks for watching this video. As always, leave comments and questions in the comments below and I'll be happy to answer them for you. I hope you enjoyed this and you're finding this a fun and enjoyable project to do. Have a great day.